Well, I must confess that this parable about the kingdom of heaven used to give me a significant amount of heartburn. I mean, it starts out quite unassumingly, right? The kingdom of heaven is like a king who prepared a wedding banquet for his son. You can almost hear the birds chirping, the flowers budding. But as the story progresses, things take a sharp turn for the worse as the king's invitations are rejected and his servants even beaten and killed by those who were invited. And that leads to this. The king was enraged. He sent his army and destroyed those murderers and burned their city. I thought we were talking about the kingdom of heaven here. And who is the king of the kingdom of heaven? It's God, right? And didn't Jesus say just a few chapters earlier in this same book that God the Father is perfect because of the way he treats his enemies? Something does not seem to add up here. Why would Jesus describe the king in this parable in a way that's different from how he's previously described his Father? Was that the point of this parable? What is the point of this parable? What is Jesus trying to communicate to his audience? Well, maybe we should start right there. Who is his audience? Well, we're sort of looking at these stories one by one each week, and so we're moving kind of at a snail's pace through the gospel. And so let's remember that this particular story is not only being told during the final week of Jesus' life and ministry, but it's also being told kind of in the midst of a long discourse with the Pharisees. And they keep coming at him in different ways at this point, trying to trap him with their questions. They're trying to trick him into saying something that will turn the people against him and give them grounds to arrest him. So the gloves have come off at this point, and they're not even trying to hide their hostility any longer. They're plotting to kill him. He knows they're plotting to kill him. And they know he knows they're plotting to kill him. And they don't care. They're just on a mission. In other words, the Pharisees and the other religious leaders that were involved here are rapidly nearing the point of shutting themselves off from the Holy Spirit completely, of totally closing their eyes, their ears, and their hearts to the truth. If they do not stop and turn around, they will soon be irrevocably trapped in their darkness, like Pharaoh at the Red Sea, who's not even going to think twice about charging in there with his chariot. You know, it was never supposed to be that way. It didn't have to be this way. Every single one of these Pharisees and Sadducees and experts in the law and chief priests, even the high priest, they were all invited to the party. They were the ones who were supposed to be celebrating. They were supposed to be the ones heralding the arrival of the prince, the bridegroom. I mean, if anyone should have recognized Jesus as the Messiah, it was them. And as it turns out, of course, they did recognize Jesus as the Messiah, but they weren't going to accept him as the Messiah. They had decided they'd rather not go to any party that was being held in his honor. So I'm sure this point was not lost on the Pharisees in this parable about the kingdom of heaven being like the great wedding feast of the king. They knew they were the invited ones. They were the chosen ones. They were the special ones. The nation of Israel, the children of Abraham, God's elect. Of course, they were invited. And not only were they the invited ones, but nobody else could be or would be invited. This invitation was exclusive. At least that's what they believed about God, the King. So when Jesus gets to the part of the story where all the invitees then start burning everything down and killing all the servants, once again, he was shocking them with a reversal of what they anticipated in their heads. The idea that they, the special chosen ones, would not end up at the wedding feast or even end up in the kingdom was impossible, inconceivable. But refusing to enter was exactly what they were doing. And for them to persist in that course of action was suicide. Not because God was going to kill them, but because they were going to kill God. And when a created being gets to the point where they kill the source of their own life, guess what happens? The same thing that happens to cancer cells when they finally kill their host body. The same thing that happens to your ladder when you cut off the tree branch it's resting on. We're going to talk more about that a little next week. But the simple truth is, you and I, we don't have any life within us of our own. And if you destroy the person who is sustaining your life, what's going to happen to you? So you see, in this parable, we sometimes say that analogies break down at a certain point, right? Even for Jesus. And in this parable, well, if the servants or the people that are invited just end up killing the king, well, nothing's going to happen to them. We know you can kill kings and live still in this world. I just studied French and English history with my girls. The French Revolution. They chopped a lot of heads off and nothing happened, right? But you can't do that with God because he is the source of your life. And if you destroy the person who is sustaining your life, it's not going to end well for you either. That's why Paul describes God's wrath in Romans 1 as his handing the wicked over to death. He doesn't kill them. He does not execute them or punish them. He doesn't even hate them. But they've determined to separate themselves from him, their creator and their sustainer. And he eventually says, okay, if that's what you want, I will give you up. Refusing to come to the party was rebellion against the king, mutiny against the kingdom. And so Jesus said, don't you understand? That's exactly what you're doing. How do you think that's going to work out for you? And then he proceeded to explain that the kingdom of heaven was not exclusively for these who had been invited first. If they didn't want to have anything to do with the king or his wedding feast, the invitation would be extended to others. Don't you see, Jesus was saying, that if you don't want to come to the feast, because I'm not the Messiah you were hoping for, that's your prerogative. But there are many others who will come, and they will be invited. And isn't that exactly what happened in the years following Jesus' death and resurrection? The good news about God and the message of salvation was taken to the whole Gentile world, and the Jews lost their monopoly on Yahweh. But the refusal of the religious leaders to attend this party was not the only example of a rebellious attitude we find in the story. Jesus also said, when the king came in to see those guests, he saw a man who was not dressed for a wedding. The king said, friend, how were you allowed to come in here? You're not dressed for a wedding. But the man said, nothing. Now, in the culture of that day, not being appropriately dressed for a wedding feast would have been a huge insult to the guest of honor as well as the host of the party. That's a point that's probably a little lost on us these days, as there seem to be plenty of people in our culture who are willing to show up to a wedding dressed in their pajamas. But that certainly was not the custom back then. Especially at a wedding feast, your attire and your careful attention to how you looked reflected your participation in the celebration. But this man had turned up in something terribly inappropriate, it seems. And that, coupled with the fact that he said nothing when spoken to, even when addressed as friend, on his own terms. He may have been happy to receive whatever the king was going to give him, but he couldn't have cared less about the host, the guest of honor, or the celebration itself. Does that sound familiar? How about this group of people that Jesus described in Matthew 7, just a few chapters before this? Not everyone who says to me, Lord, Lord, will enter the kingdom of heaven, but only the one who does the will of my Father who is in heaven. Many will say to me on that day, Lord, Lord, did we not prophesy in your name, and in your name drive out demons, and in your name perform many miracles? Then I will tell them plainly, I never knew you. Away from me, you evildoers. It doesn't matter that those people show up to the party. Jesus says that in their hearts, they've never cared about having a relationship with God. That's what it means, I don't know you. Of course, he knows them. He knows how many hairs there are on their heads. But there's no intimacy there. There's no friendship. In fact, they only seem to be there because they feel entitled. Look at all the stuff we did for you. You owe us. We deserve to be here. The man who showed up to the wedding feast with total disregard for the host and the honored guest seemed to have that kind of entitlement. So Jesus was putting the Pharisees and us on notice that refusing to come to the party or coming with an attitude of entitlement result in the same thing. At the end of the day, that it's not about geography, are you at the party or not at the party? It's about where your heart is. Do you know the King? Are you celebrating with him? Are you there to give joy to others and to him, or just to take something for yourself? I like the fact that Jesus pictured God in this story as a guy who just wants to party with his friends. I think that says something true about God. He wants to have a relationship with everyone. He wants to hang out with you. He wants to be our friend. And he's not exclusive. He doesn't play favorites. He invites everyone to the party. But sadly, as Jesus said at the end of this parable, many will refuse to come. Many will reject the invitation. In the meantime, God is doing everything he can to keep people from rejecting his offer of life. Telling this very story was just one more attempt to convince those Pharisees to change direction. He knew just how to reach them. He knows just how to reach us. And he'll do whatever it takes to get our attention, even if that means yelling when he would prefer to whisper. God invites everyone to the party. And that means he's invited you too, and you too.